What's up, everybody? Welcome to the first part of the problem of 2025. It is New Year's Day as I am recording this. I am going solo for this episode. Rob is out. Yeah, even saying it's 2025, that's going to take a little getting used to. Sounds a little bit strange coming off the tongue. This might be a little bit of a shorter episode, because number one, I'm solo, and number two, I'm an old man and I'm tired from New Year's Eve last night. Thank you very much to everybody who came out for the shows here at the Dojo of Comedy. Great venue. This is my first time there, and we loved it. Had a great time. Saw some great people, and it was a nice New Year's Eve. And now that we are in the new year, go check out my website, comicdavesmith.com, because I'm going to be on the road all throughout the year, coming to a city near you, with Robbie the Fire Bernstein coming with me on, I think, almost all of these gigs. So comicdavesmith.com for all of the ticket links. Some of the links are up. There's a few that still need to be added, but check that out. I will be coming to a city near you at some point this year, I'm sure. Okay, so I have a couple things that I wanted to talk about today, and then if we have time, I will take some questions from the chat. I guess number one, we should talk about, there was this horrible last night. It's being reported right now that I believe 15 people were killed. Many more were injured. Few police officers were shot. Apparently this guy drove a truck into a crowded street in New Orleans, and as we've seen over the last decade or so, in Europe, there's been a few of these, but this is a new attack of choice by terrorists. You know, in crowded streets, cars can do a lot of damage. And there's, post 9/11, there's been some very simple changes that were made that made it very difficult for another 9/11 to happen. And I'm not referring to anything like the Department of Homeland Security being created or the TSA groping grandmas or anything like that. Simply, like they lock the cockpit door now, like just little things like that, where it's like, oh, it's going to be really hard. And then one of the major things that allowed 9/11 to happen, that just simply was over after 9/11, is that the old, and I'm, old enough to remember this, but the old thinking, the wisdom pre 9/11 was that if there is a hostage type situation, a plane being hijacked or something like that, what you want to do is stay calm and do what they say, and hopefully a negotiator is going to get on the phone or whatever with them, and they'll be able to work out some type of deal and land the plane and convince them. It wasn't really in the popular consciousness that this was going to be a suicide mission where they were going to turn this plane into a missile, in effect. And so essentially, if you were to ever try to hijack a plane again, one of the major problems you'd have is that, again, the 9/11 hijackers, I believe, had like box cutters and things like that. It's not like they were, had machine guns or something. And people aren't just going to sit there and take it anymore because they know they're going to die anyway, so they might as well try. So good luck, getting a plane again is going to be very difficult. However, how the hell do you stop people from plowing into a group of people in a car? I mean, that's just very, very difficult to do. And this is one of the reasons why there have been several attacks of this nature in Europe, and we just had this horrible one last night on New Year's Eve. Obviously, information is still coming out, but pretty clearly seems to be the day was chosen for a symbolic reason, and that is one of the major points of terrorism, is to affect psychologically the way people live their lives, and to create a situation where you don't feel comfortable to go out in crowds on a holiday or something like that. This just happened, obviously, last night. What's being reported right now is that evidently the claim is that the guy had like an ISIS flag. Then I did see some other people reporting that he was, you know, let me look back up at this because I saw it here, but that he was either, I can't remember if it was former police or former military, one of those. Okay, yeah, according Carol Markowitz. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, Carol, because I know you and we've done a few cable news shows together. But she tweeted just about an hour ago, breaking: the man who rammed his car into people in New Orleans last night is named Shamsed Din Jabbar, born and raised in Texas, served in the U.S. Army. So, you know, this is, if the reports of him flying an ISIS flag are true, then it would seem like what we're looking at is one of these, you know, homebred, was the term I'm looking for is eluding me at the moment, but essentially one of these people who took up the cause, like a Muslim who's American who took up the cause and sided with ISIS. Look, I'll just say this. You know what, actually, Natalie, if you wouldn't mind, if you could pull up this clip, pull up the, which is, I love any excuse to play this, but if you just YouTube Ron Paul Giuliani moment, and then I'll play that clip here in a way, because I do think it is relevant to this conversation. So what I was just going to say is that I apologize for regular listeners who have seen, you know, heard this before. I'm going to make you watch it again, but it's okay. You can never watch the great Ron Paul too much. But, you know, I have been saying now for quite a while on the show that I am really concerned about the risk of terrorism going forward and Al-Qaeda, ISIS-like operations. Again, I don't think they're going to be able to pull off 9/11 style things, but there's a lot, you know, I'm not trying to give anyone any ideas, but there's just a lot of other things that you can do. And it is next to impossible to constantly be on guard against any act of terrorism, especially when you have a situation like what appears to be the case with this guy, where you have an American who is, you know, who sides with, you know, ISIS or Al-Qaeda. And I think you know, the reason why I've been saying this for a while, and I'm not saying that this is true in 100% of the cases, or even in this most recent one. I mean, we really don't know. We don't have a lot of information. But I'm sorry, 1 second. Oh yeah. Go ahead, show me. It's anyone that says Ron Paul Giuliani moment should be the right one. Yeah, that one. Hold on, if you go up right there, that one right there. Yes, that's perfect. So get that ready here. Hold on 1 second, we'll play, but that's perfect. So the point is that what motivates terrorism is an important factor. And it's always very tricky when you talk about this, because what people who don't want to hear this will do is they will just drive the IQ of the conversation down. And the same thing when you're talking about the war in Ukraine. Like if you say, as is the title of Scott Horton's great new book, it Provoked. If you say that the West provoked the war in Ukraine, then everybody who doesn't want to hear that, their counter is always, so you're saying it's justified, which is just like two completely different claims. And understanding what motivates an evil act does not mean that you don't think the act is evil. Anyway, the reason I wanted to pull up this Ron Paul clip because I think it's super relevant to this conversation, but also that part of the reason why I'm always kind of aware of this stuff is that this was my moment. Now, it's not unique to me. There were a lot of people who found Ron Paul from this moment, but literally, this was in 2007, so 18 years ago, and I was just a kid. And when I say kid, I was, 23 or whatever. I was a young person, and I was not very interested in politics. I was somebody, I didn't know a lot about this stuff. It wasn't like I grew up like immersed in all of the stuff that I'm obsessed with now. I was just a kid. I was kind of loosely interested in some things. It was an interesting time in the country. It was 9/11 had happened 6 years earlier. We were already in the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq. Both wars were going very, very bad. And I just happened to be, I remember I went to my mother's house, and I don't know if we had dinner or something like that, but I went to my mother's house and we happened to be watching the Republican primary debate. And this was the year that ultimately Barack Obama became president. But I happened to be watching this debate and I saw this moment and I was like, whoa, who the fuck is that guy? That's really interesting. And what was so much more interesting to me, people today maybe can't appreciate this, but at the time, the Republicans were the war party, and the Democrats at least posed as the anti-war party. And so the fact that this was a Republican from Texas, like the sitting president, George W. Bush, a Republican from Texas who was making this point, to me was just fascinating. I couldn't, now that I mentioned, I couldn't think of a better way to start the new year than to play this. So let's play the Ron Paul, what got dubbed ultimately the Giuliani moment. And here's the point Ron Paul was making 18 years ago.
Congressman Paul, I believe you are the only man on the stage who opposes the war in Iraq, who would bring the troops home as quickly as almost immediately, sir. Are you out of step with your party? Is your party out of step with the rest of the world? If either of those is the case, why are you seeking its nomination?
Well, I think the party has lost its way because the conservative wing of the Republican Party always advocated a non-interventionist foreign policy. Senator Robert Taft didn't want to be in NATO. George Bush won the election in year 2000 campaigning on a humble foreign policy, no nation building, no policing of the world. Republicans were elected to end the Korean War. The Republicans were elected to end the Vietnam War. There's a strong tradition of being anti-war in the Republican Party. It is the constitutional position. It is the advice of the founders to follow a non-interventionist foreign policy. Stay out of entangling alliances. Be friends with countries. Negotiate and talk with them and trade with them.
So you could already see, look, if you could imagine, right, because this is a debate, I think there's like 9 or 10 people on the stage, and every one of them is just being a politician. They're just like talking in dumb slogans and whatever. And so already in this moment, I was just fascinated. Like, I was like, oh, this guy's like actually just a wise older guy who's like talking about history and making compelling arguments, and like so already I was just kind of interested. It was like, whoa, this is different. Like, one of these things is not like the other. So anyway, you keep playing.
Just think of the tremendous improvement relationships with Vietnam. We lost 60,000 men. We came home in defeat. Now we go over there and invest in Vietnam. So there's a lot of merit to the advice of the founders and following the Constitution. And my argument is that we shouldn't go to war so carelessly. When we do, the wars don't end.
Congressman, you don't think that changed with the 9/11 attack, sir?
What changed?
The non-interventionist policies.
No, non-intervention was a major contributing factor. Have you ever read about the reasons they attacked us? They attack us because we've been over there. We've been bombing Iraq for 10 years. We've been in the Middle East. I think Reagan was right. We don't understand the irrationality of Middle Eastern politics. So right now we're building an embassy in Iraq that's bigger than the Vatican. We're building 14 permanent bases. What would we say here if China was doing this in our country or in the Gulf of Mexico? We would be objecting. We need to look at what we do from the perspective of what would happen if somebody else did it to us.
Are you suggesting we invited the 9/11 attack, sir?
Let's pause it right here. So again, what was so stark to me about this, it's weird. I haven't watched this in a while, but as I watch it back, it's like I completely understand why I got sucked in. And I was so fascinated by this moment. It's not over yet. We'll get to some of the really interesting parts here. But this, literally, I just got obsessed. I was like, who is this guy? I have to know everything about him. And I ended up, like, I think I went and bought one of his books, which was like, at the time, it was Revolution was the first Ron Paul book that I bought. And I got it, I think at Barnes & Noble's or something like that. And I was just it. And then I just like literally just fell down the rabbit hole and became the libertarian autist you know and love today. But it was one of the things that was so interesting is that this point was so overwhelmingly compelling Like, it was like, oh my God, yeah, you know, like, that's really interesting. And it's hard, I think, for younger people to even understand, because if you weren't around in that time, that the entire line, which was accepted by everyone, by the way, but the entire line that the Bush administration was pushing since 9/11, that was in 2001, this is 6 years later in 2007, was that they hate us for our freedom. And that's why they attacked us on 9/11. So they hate us for our freedom. And that, if that's your operating system, then you're like, well, I guess there's no other option than to kill all these people. I mean, what? They want to come kill us just because we're free? What are you going to do? And then Ron Paul's up here just making the point that, okay, listen, no, that's not it. They hate us for what we're doing to them. And how would we feel if anyone was doing that to us? We'd probably be ready to go kill them too. Now, again, none of the is justifying terrorism. He's just saying, look, we got to be smart about what we're doing and the reaction that is fairly predictable that comes with that. The other thing that was already so stark, and believe me, it's about to get a lot dumber, but the follow-up questions from the moderators were so, I mean, they're just like 40 IQ points below Ron Paul's point. He's saying, hey, listen, you know, this was the advice of the founders. This is what the conservative wing of the Republicans always believed, that entangling alliances and looking for monsters to destroy around the world would end up having all of these negative outcomes. And then the response from the moderator is, you don't think that all changed with 9/11? like the laws of logic no longer exist or something like that because we got hit on 9/11? And even the follow-up question, well, and then the second follow-up question is, so you're saying we invited the attack? And it's like, what? Like, it's just always trying to dumb down the point because nobody really wants to grapple with what he's saying. All right, let's keep playing.
Are you suggesting we invited the 9/11 attack, sir?
I'm suggesting that we listen to the people who attacked us and the reason they did it. And they are delighted that we're over there because Osama bin Laden has said, I am glad you're over on our sand because we can target you so much easier. They have already now, since that time, have killed 3,400 of our men, and I don't think it was necessary.
Wendell, may I make a comment on that? That's really an extraordinary statement. It's an extraordinary statement as someone who lived through the attack of September 11, that we invited the attack because we were attacking Iraq. I don't think I've ever heard that before, and I've heard some pretty absurd explanations for September 11.
Okay, so pause it here. So this is just, I mean, it's just, everything about this is so beautiful. It's really bringing me back to my roots here. So Rudy Giuliani then, of course. Now, it's hard to remember this at the time, but Rudy Giuliani was actually, I don't remember if at this debate, but Rudy Giuliani was leading in the polls for quite a while. He was the favorite to be the Republican nominee for quite a while. He ended up falling apart, I think in part because of this moment, but not entirely. And John McCain ended up ultimately winning the nominee. He was not the favorite at all until like very late into the primary. But anyway, so Rudy Giuliani takes this moment to go to say, you know, did he just say they did 9/11 because we were attacking Iraq? I've never heard that before, are his words, and I've heard some pretty ridiculous explanations for 9/11. Now, what is so amazing about this, if you know anything, which by the way, I did not know at the time, but then, you know, as I said, I fell down the rabbit hole and got obsessed with this stuff. But literally, this was in Osama bin Laden's declaration of war on America, in Osama bin Laden's open letter to America, in almost every interview that he was in, this was one of his stated grievances constantly. It was always the grievances that Osama bin Laden stated, like it was a bunch of jihadist stuff, you know, Allah Akbar and you know, Sharia law and, you know, all the Islamist stuff. And then it was like, okay, why are we at war with you? Because you are at war with us. And here's what you've done. And the list was, you have military bases in our holy land in Saudi Arabia. You support Israel in their ethnic cleansing and slaughtering of the Palestinians. Yeah, it was going on before just this year. And you prop up dictators in the region. It was just filled with American sock puppets, and that you slaughter Muslim, innocent men, women, and children, and specifically in Iraq. Now, just to be clear here, the bases that are in Saudi Arabia that he's complaining about were put there for what was called the dual containment strategy, to contain both Iraq and Iran. And they were what was used, those bases were used not only in the first war in Iraq under George H.W. Bush, but then also in the Bill Clinton years when they put the full blockade around the country and they had massive bombing campaigns and killed many, many people. I don't know, there was the UN estimated that 500,000 children had died as a result of the blockade around the country, children dying from starvation and malnutrition. I've seen many people argue, and I think quite convincingly, that number was drastically inflated. So I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but it was at minimum in the tens of thousands of children who died there, and quite possibly in the hundreds of thousands. And regardless, it's just for Rudy Giuliani to be bragging that he's never heard this before. All he's saying is he's never read or listened to anything Osama bin Laden said. It's stunning the ignorance that he's so proud of. Now, by the way, I'm not saying because Osama bin Laden said it, it's right. You could have an argument, but for your argument to be, I've never heard this before, is absurd. However, because this is the George W. Bush Republican primary, this gets a thunderous round of applause. The crowd goes crazy for this because they were all just so stupid and drunk on war on terrorism nonsense. And so Ron Paul's over here giving a history lesson or making this philosophical argument. And then Rudy Giuliani goes, I've heard some ridiculous stuff, but I never heard nothing like that before. And the crowd goes nuts. And now, because Rudy Giuliani is a politician, he's like, ooh, the crowd just went nuts for my reaction. I just smacked this guy down. So he takes it a step further. And this moment to me, I'm not exaggerating when I say this moment changed my life. And let's play the rest of it.
And I would ask the congressman to withdraw that comment and tell us that he didn't really mean that.
Congressman?
I believe very sincerely that the CIA is correct when they teach and talk about blowback. When we went into Iran in 1953 and installed the Shah, yes, there was blowback. The reaction to that was the taking of our hostages, and that persists. And if we ignore that at our own risk. That if we think that we can do what we want around the world and not incite hatred, then we have a problem. They don't come here to attack us because we're rich and we're free. They come and they attack us because we're over there. I mean, what would we think if we were if other foreign countries were doing that to us?
Can I have 30 seconds, please?
No, wait a second.
So that was the moment there. I just thought, I remember, and I think it's kind of hard. Maybe some of this is lost on younger people who weren't there for that time. But there was something about when he goes, and by the way, the audio on that clip was not great, but the applause for Giuliani in the room was thunderous. And when he goes, I demand that Ron Paul apologize for that and say he didn't really mean that. What you just expected out of any politician, especially when they've lost the crowd, is to apologize, or at least in some sense walk it back, or go kind of well, no, I didn't really mean it like that, and of course we're the good guys and they're the bad guys, and of course, but and Ron Paul just his response was, I very sincerely believe that when the CIA talks about blowback, they are correct. By the way, blowback was a term coined by the CIA, which is just an interesting little, bit of information on top of this, because they're very well aware that their covert actions have unintended consequences. They're very aware of that. And of course, by the way, and then he just gives a history lesson, which was amazing, which was news to me at the time, that in 1953, the CIA overthrew the democratically elected government of Iran and installed the Shah. And that you're like, oh, that's why Iran hates us. That's why they still hate us. Because they lived for, from 53 to 1979 under a dictatorship that was imposed on them by a foreign country. And when Ron Paul goes, how would we feel? How would we feel about that? You think about all the Russiagate nonsense when they tried to say that Donald Trump was like a Russian spy. Just try to imagine for a second he really was. Like try to imagine that it really just was the truth, that Russia came over here and overthrew our government and installed their chosen government. Can you imagine the type of hatred that we would have toward them? And so anyway, this moment to me was amazing, and it really had a huge impact on my life. And then, of course, I dove deep and read all of Ron Paul's books. And then I read Rothbard and Mises and Tom Woods and Peter Schiff and like all these guys. And anyway, essentially, the point is the reason that I've been very concerned about terrorism here in America is that if Ron Paul's right about this, which I sure think he is, I just think it's like an overwhelming argument. And there's been great books written about this stuff. But like the thing, whatever, even if you want to say that like Osama bin Laden himself was just a madman and was just, which clearly he was, and he was evil and he was quite willing to kill innocent people. But the point is that in order for him to recruit people who were actually willing to give their own lives in order to hurt somebody else, you got to think, like, what makes somebody do that? Like, what? And this was never that hard for me to like wrap my head around. But like, what would push someone to the point where they were willing to give their own life just to maybe hurt you? And it's real easy to sit there and say, oh, it's their religion. It's because they're such religious fanatics. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of religious fanatics throughout the world, including Muslims, who just don't do that. They just don't do that. I think Indonesia has the biggest Muslim population in the world. We're not getting a lot of Indonesian terrorists. And where were the terrorists from? They were Saudis and Egyptians. They lived in two countries under American sock puppet dictators. They hid out in Afghanistan, but none of them were from there. And, look, this was another point that Pat Buchanan made. I remember there's this video of Pat Buchanan that was like, the timing really lines up. It was right around 15 years before October 7th. And he was talking about some Israeli, I can't remember which one, but some Israeli operation that killed like a few hundred Palestinians, including like a bunch of children. And he was like, where do you think the brothers of those like girls who got killed, where are they going to be in 15 years? What do you think they're going to be doing? Because if you're really asking yourself, what would get you to that point, no matter what your religion is, what would get you to that point where you're happy to die to maybe go kill some of them? Try watching your little sister get killed in front of you. Try watching your kids or your mother or your grandmother or someone you really care about. Watch them get slaughtered by some other country. That might be the thing that gets you there. Anyway, the point is that for the entire last year, America has been, I was going to say propping up, but it's really much more than that. I mean, America has been facilitating the slaughter of the Palestinians for well over a year now. And this absolutely just simply could not happen without U.S. support. And that is exactly the thing that motivates these guys. And like, I do think this is a real concern going forward. And it is, Michael Schumer, I might be saying that his last name wrong, but something real close to that. Schweimer. He was the CIA, the head of the bin Laden unit in the CIA. And I believe he went a little bit nutty more recently. I'm not sure about that. I shouldn't say that without really remembering. I remember thinking he became a little bit of a kook. I could be wrong. But he wrote a couple books on this topic. He testified before Congress about it. I mean, he was the head of the bin Laden unit at the CIA, right? Like, he was the guy who was in charge of dealing with terrorism before 9/11. And he flat out testified before Congress and wrote in his book that he was just like, look, we got to be honest with the American people here. And he was like, look, our military presence in the Middle East and our support of Israel comes with this cost. The cost is terrorism. And if we don't wish to pay that cost, then okay. And if we do wish to pay that cost, then okay. Like, if you're saying that the cost is worth it or something like that, then all right. But let's be honest about that. Let's be honest about what is going on here. And it's like Pat Buchanan always said, terrorism is the price of empire. And if you don't wish to pay that price, you got to get rid of the empire. And we haven't done that. And Donald Trump and his foreign policy picks certainly don't seem to be moving in that direction at all. If anything, it's going to be more and more unconditional support for Israel. And I do think that this is the cost that is going to be associated with that. So sorry if that's not a very cheery, optimistic message for the first podcast of the year, but that is how I feel. I am really concerned about this stuff. And I do think, Scott Horton has said, who's the best foreign policy expert in the country, he has said many times that it's his, like, thank God Osama bin Laden is dead, because he really was. I don't think there's anyone else in the radical Sunni world who has quite the cachet that he had. We'll see, who knows, but he really was the guy who would have been able to organize and inspire these type of attacks. But that doesn't mean they can't happen without him. And as we've seen in Europe and the United States of America, even since Osama bin Laden's death, there have been pretty awful terrorist attacks. And it appears we just got another one last night. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is sheathunderwear.com, the underwear of legends, and the official boxer brief of the Part of the Problem podcast. They have been advertising on this show for well over 3 years at this point. I love this company. I cannot say enough great things about their product. It is the best pair of boxer briefs I have ever worn. I'm wearing a pair right now. Every time you hear from me, I am wearing a pair of Sheath underwear because they're the only underwear that I ever wear. They're the only ones I own. I've thrown out the rest of my boxer briefs because nothing stacks up to Sheath. And I'll tell you, I still have the 3 pairs that they sent me when they first came on as a sponsor, which is going on 4 years ago now. And they're still as comfortable as the first day I got them. So support the sponsor who supports our show and get yourself a great product while you're at it. Go to sheathunderwear.com. Use the promo code PROBLEM20. That will get you 20% off your entire order. Sheathunderwear.com. All right, let's get back into the show. Okay. Switching gears here a little bit. There's one other topic that I did want to discuss that I am loosely following. I'm not super up on the exact details, but it seems as if yesterday on New Year's Eve over on Twitter, there was a little bit of drama where there seems to have been I was going to say the word deplatforming, but I don't think that's actually correct. From what I understand, I don't think anybody's actually been kicked off the platform, but evidently there was a group of Twitter accounts, X accounts, that got demonetized and had their blue checks taken away from them. The people here, hold on, I think I have some of the list here. Sorry, let me just pull this up. So I have it looks like Myron Gaines from the Fresh and Fit podcast, Jake Shields, Solomon Ahmed, Stu Peters, Dr. Lupus, and I think a few others. I thought Nick Fuentes might have lost his blue check too, but I'm not seeing his name on this particular tweet. Let me check that right now. Yeah, well, he doesn't have a blue check mark on there, so yeah, that might have been him too in there. So a bunch of people, and now it seems, although it hasn't exactly been made clear, but it seems like there was it was people basically, for you guys who don't know, of course, we did an episode on this before, but there was a huge dust up on Twitter over this H-1B visa program. And the Vivek Ramaswamy tweet and a couple things that Elon Musk said really drew, a tremendous amount of ire. A lot of people were very upset about their position on this stuff. And there was a lot of people were being, let's just say, very critical of them. Now, all of these people, I believe, who have been demonetized and lost their blue check and all of this, were all people who were very adamantly against on the other side of the HB1 visa, policy. These were people who were very critical of the program that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. Well, I shouldn't even say they were defending it, because that's not exactly right. As I said on the episode, both of them kind of said the thing should be gutted and overhauled. But anyway, this was what a big Twitter storm was about. However, all of the people who ended up being demonetized or losing their blue check marks were not only people who were critical of the visa program, because there's many people who are critical of that who did not get demonetized or lose their blue check mark, but they're also all, let's say, I want to put this in a way that's the most charitable. Let's say they're all pretty critical of not only Israel, but also of Jews. Because I also don't think, I saw some of them saying that it's like, oh, it's not really about that, it's because we're critical of Israel. But if I'm being honest, there's also a lot of people who are critical of Israel. Like, I'm critical of the visa program and of Israel. I have not lost my check mark, or I'm not actually monetized on Twitter. But so I guess they can't take that away from me, because I've never actually monetized the damn thing. I think I'm probably leaving money on the table for not doing that. Maybe I should, but I'm not. But no, it's people who are also critical of Jews in general. And I don't know. I wanted to give a few thoughts on this, because I do think this is a bad path to go down. I think this is not a wise decision by Elon Musk. And I think if he is making this decision, he should be transparent and clear about it. To be 100% clear, just disclosing my own bias or whatever, the people who have been deplatformed and demonetized, not deplatformed, I'm sorry, but demonetized and lost their blue check mark and all of this, they range. I know some of them, and I've done some of their shows, and then some of them I've also had some fairly unpleasant interactions with. So like a few of them have been particularly shitty to me, and a few of them have been very nothing but kind and respectful to me. I also, full bias, like I'm Jewish and I don't like the anti-Jewish stuff. So that's my bias. But in some ways, that almost makes it a more interesting situation, because if you really do, when you get into conversations about free speech and free speech platforms, the stuff that you don't like is actually a better test of your commitment to that value than the stuff you do like. Because, of course, we all want the stuff that we do like and do agree with to be, we don't want any of them to be silenced or demonetized. There's a great old Noam Chomsky line where he said something like, you don't believe in free speech unless you believe in free speech that you hate, because everybody believes in free speech that they love. And he said Hitler and Stalin both believed in free speech that they agreed with. Like, they weren't trying to shut you down if you said what they wanted you to say. The whole point of freedom of speech is that you're allowed to say the things that other people really don't want you to say. That's the real test of it. Now, just a couple thoughts that I have on this. Number one, I am somebody who very much believes in free speech. When we talk about free speech, though, I think a lot of times it's free speech. Freedom of speech is kind of like freedom of movement or the freedom of religion, or what. They're kind of abstractions. They're not exactly tangible. So, like, I'm not true. Like, people claim they're free speech absolutists. I don't know if that's actually the technically correct term. I'm much more of a property rights absolutist than I am a free speech absolutist. And this is something that most of us are without ever really thinking about it. It's just, it's the de facto state of belief in a Western civilized society. So when I say property rights and not just speech rights, I mean that, you don't actually have the right to say whatever you want to say in somebody else's home, right? Like, so Natalie, who's our producer, who's here running the show right now, we're remote today, but Natalie and Rob come to my house to record the show regularly. Now, technically speaking, I could kind of dictate what you're allowed to say or not say in my house. Now, I could be really arbitrary and tyrannical, if you want to call it that, with it. I could say, you're not allowed to use any words that end in the letter A. And if you do, you have to get out of my house. Technically, I have the right to do that. It would be pretty stupid, but like I have the right to do that because it's my house. So I can decide. Now, okay, if you're going to proceed in your life that way, good luck getting along with other people and maintaining relationships and things like that. But technically, we would all kind of agree that like you do have a right to tell someone to leave your house. It's your house. Now, they still have their freedom of speech, but they're going to have to take that speech somewhere else. So that's kind of like the base of how. Now, there also are lots of rules. None of them have ever been spoken out loud, but they're always implied because everyone just knows it. But like, there are things you're not allowed to say in my house. Like you can't curse out my wife while you're here, or, you know, like now if next time you come over, you curse out my wife, I'd be like, I don't know if this is going to work out with us, you know, because that's kind of a deal breaker for me. But so there is, I just think it's important just to make this point to understand that it's like, whenever we talk about these things, it's always really about property rights. Now, I'll say this. What happened with Twitter in the old Twitter was not simply that the people who owned Twitter decided what you were and weren't allowed to say on Twitter. What happened was the government got involved and heavily pressured and really kind of threatened these tech companies to crack down on speech. So that to me is like a blatant First Amendment violation and anti-free speech, because it's not it's a very different thing if like I were to say, hey, you can't curse out my wife in my house, or you got to get out of my house, than if the government were to come in and say, you can't criticize the government in your house, right? Those are just different in kind. And so anyway, what Elon Musk came in and he said he was going to make Twitter a free speech platform. And I want to give him a lot of credit here. You know, I may have some disagreements with Elon Musk and even with Vivek Ramaswamy about some of the things they were saying about American culture, what Ramaswamy was saying about American culture. And I'm a critic of the HB1 visa program. I do also want to say, I think both of them have been like tremendously forces for good in America over the last year, or 2 years particularly. And I think Elon Musk, he bought Twitter and said he was going to make it a free speech platform. And I think he certainly has made it much more of one than it used to be. And so I think he's overall done a pretty good job. Now, he has fallen a little bit short of the goal that, or of the promise, I guess you could say, that he made. There was a good example of this was when Kanye West got kicked off of Twitter. I think he posted a swastika or something like that. There was like it wasn't just a regular swastika, it was like some version of a swastika or whatever. But he got kicked off Twitter for this. And this creates a problem because Elon Musk came in and what he said, and he was very clear about this, he explicitly stated this on many different occasions. He said, this is a free speech platform, and as long as you're not breaking the law, you're not going to get kicked off. Now, it is not against the law for Kanye to tweet a swastika, okay? It's just not. And so you could understand we're like, okay, yeah, like threatening somebody or something like that. Okay, if that's illegal, then you can't do that on Twitter. So that would be like what Elon's stated limit was. But once you're kicking people off for hate speech, you're no longer doing what you said you were going to do. And listen, this happens a lot in life. People say they're going to do something, they fall a little bit short of that, but maybe it's still better that they said they were going to do that and they fall a little bit short rather than falling a lot of bit short. Okay. But here's how I actually feel about this. My major beef with the old censorship regime was that it was actually done by the government, which is like an institution of force, and that it wasn't like just somebody deciding what they wanted to do with their platform. So that was my major issue with it. And I've talked about this at length many times. It's not just arbitrarily because I don't like the government, but it's okay if a private company does it. There's many reasons to want to draw a line there and say that the government can't come in and start regulating speech. But on top of that, the major issue for me was always that people were getting kicked off of Twitter for telling the truth. I mean, this was like, and telling the truth that opposed the tyrannical regime's policies. There are people like Alex Berenson were getting kicked off Twitter for just telling the truth about COVID. And this happened to lots of people. I mean, and I witnessed a lot of it during the COVID years. And of course, not just on Twitter, on Facebook and Instagram and all of these places, YouTube, or all of them. And so this was a major problem. Now, I will say that I don't, like, when it comes to these platforms, I don't necessarily think that there have to be no rules or there have to be no things that you're not allowed to say on the platform. In other words, what I'm saying is, like, my concern is that people are allowed to tell the truth. If you were going to say the rules of Twitter are like, you're not allowed, there's words you're not allowed to say. Like, you can't say, you know, whatever, we're gonna have to bleep all the words out on YouTube anyway. So just think of all the of fucked up words, you know, you're not supposed to say, okay? If the rule was like, you can't say that, I don't really like, my thing isn't like, no, you have to be allowed to go call people a on Twitter or something like that. If it was just like, hey, you can't say that word here, that wouldn't be the biggest deal to me. The issue comes when it's like, number one, you're saying you're going to be a free speech platform. You are saying that anything that doesn't violate the law, you are allowed to say here. But then that's not true. Now you got an issue because you're selling a product as something and it's not that. And if Elon Musk's goal, which he's said many times, his goal is to make X the everything app. The app where you can do your banking and pay your bills and communicate and research and fact check and everything, particularly the banking aspect of it. If you want that, then you have to build up a level of trust where, like, look, it doesn't mean there have to be no rules. I'll say this very clearly. If I owned a giant tech platform, I'm not sure there wouldn't be any rules about what you're allowed and not allowed to say. I mean, there are certain things to me that I just find abhorrent. There's a whole, like, really weird strain of like leftist intersectional critical theory type people who actually coined the term minor attracted person because they didn't feel that, like, they felt like pedophile had like a negative connotation to it, as it kind of does, right? You know, it's like that's kind of turned into a pejorative, and they were like, hey, it's just a sexual preference at the end of the day, so we should call you minor attracted person, not pedophile. If I owned a big tech platform, I could very likely see myself saying, nope, you're not allowed to do that. You get kicked off. If you were trying to rehabilitate the image of pedophilia, you get kicked off of my platform. I'm not against there being rules. Maybe there should, even if you want to say, again, now to be clear here, I wouldn't kick people off for hating Jews or something like that. But I'll get into that in a second. But the real issue is not that there can't be any rules. The real issue is not that the rule has to be you're allowed to say anything as long as it doesn't break the law. The issue is that that's what Elon Musk said multiple times explicitly. I think that's the issue here. Like, if you want to, and I think this is reasonable, okay? My only real demand, not that I'm in a position to make demands of Elon Musk, guy's got a few bucks and a bit of influence, but I would just say, I think this is a reasonable request, is that be transparent about what the rules are. Explain what the rules are and then apply them equally across the board. I think if you do that, you're going to clean up a lot of these problems. Like, if you want to say you're not allowed to post swastikas, then fine. But say that and make it very clear. If you want to say you're not allowed to use this word or that word or say this, okay. Now, again, I'm not saying I support that. I'm saying it is your right to do that with your property, which is this platform. Now, I think if you did that, you'd avoid a lot of the issues, Now, also, I want to be somewhat charitable here to Elon Musk and just say that I think he has done a lot of good over the last few years, and I'm sure there are struggles that come with running such a gigantic thing that I just can't imagine. You know, I have struggles just running the couple podcasts that I do, and, you know, taking care of my kids and managing my schedule, and that feels like a lot to me. So I'm sure there are a lot of challenges with like running. How many companies does Elon Musk have at this point that are all multi-billion-dollar companies? You know, like I get that. I'm sure there's a lot of challenges to that, and I don't think he should be written off. I don't think, you know, Vivek should be written off or anything like that. I think they're really important, brilliant voices right now. But I do think there's something here that you kind of got to deal with. It's like, what are the rules, man? Because the rules clearly aren't what you just said. Now, it is also true that he didn't kick people off. At least, again, by the way, correct me if I'm wrong, fans, if somebody did get kicked off of there. But I don't, from what I've seen, I haven't seen that anybody actually, anyone actually got booted off of there. And so, okay, listen, I'm trying to be reasonable and charitable here. That's an improvement. That's an improvement from just booting people off. Certainly an improvement from like kicking people off for simply saying that like lockdowns are ineffective or the vaccine doesn't work the way that these guys are telling you it does work. But I do think you gotta like be transparent about what the rules are and then apply them equally. Because the problem is when you start to, when you don't do that, you can find yourself in a situation like this where it sure does have the appearance that you're like lowering the signal or depriving people's ability to make money on your platform because they were on a different side of an issue than you, or they made you look bad, you know, and you don't want to have that. That is a really good way to lose your credibility and lose the credibility of X becoming what you want it to become, the everything app. Okay, so that's one thing. And then I would just say on top of that, and I say this again, just to be clear with my bias here, I don't like the anti-Jewish stuff. I am Jewish. I don't particularly like seeing that. And I think it's not good. I don't think it's right. And, you know, we did a whole episode on this just recently. I also think it hurts. I think it is very damaging to the cause that I believe in. And I don't think it's like, you know, if the argument is like that I only go to the surface level when I'm criticizing Israel and the neocons, but these guys get right to the heart of it, which is Jews. I think that's wrong. And I also think that many Americans, many people can be persuaded to believe that what Israel's doing is really fucked up, and that our country shouldn't be funding and arming what they're doing, that they shouldn't get an unconditional blank check from the United States of America. I think people can also be persuaded to believe that like the neocons and the corporate media and the banking industry are all incredibly corrupt and damaging to the country. But if you're just trying to attach it to like hating Jews, I do think that you're going to lose a lot of people, because a lot of people correctly recognize that as being ugly and kind of stupid and not good. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is Public Rec. I got to tell you about the Game Changer pants. If you are tired of squeezing into stiff dress pants, you got to check out the Game Changer. They look like Monday, but they feel like Sunday. Imagine clocking in while feeling as cozy as if you were still in bed sipping hot cocoa with a soft hand feel and smooth drape. These pants are a fan favorite for a reason. Whether you're closing deals in the boardroom, or you're traveling, or you're at a party, or you're just at home, the Game Changers will keep you looking sharp and feeling great. Public Rec is the ultimate men's clothing brand for blending comfort and style seamlessly. Stop suffering in regular pants and get some comfort in your life. And for a limited time, if you go to publicrec.com for a limited time, our audience can get 20% off when they use the promo code PROBLEM at checkout. That's 20% off with the promo code PROBLEM at publicrec.com. That's PUBLICREC.com. Promo code PROBLEM for 20% off. Get yourself the most comfortable pants you're ever going to wear and look great while you're wearing them. Publicrec.com. Promo code PROBLEM for 20% off. All right, let's get back into the show. Okay, so I don't like that stuff. I would not, if I had control of Twitter, ban any of those people or demonetize any of those people, because it's just a bad path to go down. and it does not solve the problem. It does not solve the problem at all. Then when I say solve the problem from my perspective, for someone who doesn't believe that hating Jews is the correct answer, it only, listen, man, you know, I know it's that kind of old, like, classical liberal, you know, slogan or whatever, sunlight is the best disinfectant, or you fight bad ideas with good ideas. The answer to hate speech is more speech. But I do think that's all true. I really do. I don't think attempting to drive things into a dark corner does not make them better. And shouldn't we all know this at this point? I mean, look, even if you are, because, you know, I see a lot of people, some other people who have not been very friendly to me, but who are like celebrating, just openly celebrating on X that all these accounts got demonetized, lost their blue check mark. I think that's very short-sighted. I mean, look, think back. If you are one of the people who really goes like anti-Semitism is out of control and there's all of this vile Jew hatred on Twitter or something like that, well, I mean, think about the censorship regime that really started in 2016. There were some people who were censored before that, but it really started in mass in 2016 and went all the way up until Elon Musk bought Twitter. So it was at least, what, I think he bought it in 22. So, you know, it was from 2016 to 2022. Every one of them was kicked off. All of them were booted from all platforms, you know? And if you're saying anti-Semitism is worse than ever, well, then, I mean, clearly we could deduce that that didn't work. So it's not even effective for your cause. I think I would argue it's kind of in a, maybe there's a, I didn't plan on making a connection between these two, but maybe there's even a similarity to the blowback stuff. That, like, you know, it actually ends up having this reverse unintended consequence of a lot of people end up going like, oh, well, how come you have to silence this guy? Well, maybe he's really telling the secret truth, and it draws more people in there. And I also think that it just, if your goal was to pull anyone out of that way of thinking, I just think this is the worst way to do it. So what I don't support any of these guys getting demonetized or getting their blue checks taken away. Obviously, like I said before, there's a range in that group of people who have been nothing but cool to me and some people who have been pretty shitty to me. But it doesn't matter, you know, like it shouldn't matter whether you were shitty to me or you were cool to me or whether I agree with your view or whether I vehemently disagree with your view. What are we doing here with X? Are we saying you know, for years, and I think this is something that for a radical libertarian like myself, there's always been this kind of question mark. It's like for years now, since Donald Trump was president the first time, really, the talking point has become, well, now free speech is a right-wing value. And when did that happen? Why does that should be something we all agree on. But, you know, there's this dynamic, and I've talked about this many, many times in the past. But when you're, okay, so if you're getting mugged at gunpoint, and you got a gun pointed at you, you're unarmed, the guy mugging you has a gun, it's pointed at you, and you go, hey, I don't believe in violence. I don't believe we should point guns at people and take their money. Now, that is the correct position. But it's also a very easy position to have when someone else has the gun and they're pointing it at you. When you have the gun, then that's the real test of whether you believe in violence or not, right? Then it really means something. And so I think there are some people who have been making the case through the years where the woke progressives had dominant control over big tech and the corporate media and the political class and Hollywood and academia and all the rest. When the woke progressives had control of all of that, and they say, hey, we're for free speech. And this was said by a lot of people. But like, if you really are for free speech, then the test kind of comes when you actually have some control over that. And when you have control and things you don't like are being said. And I do just think that, and I guess I've always believed this since the Ron Paul days, that the people, if you believe you have the truth on your side and you're fighting for what's right, then you should be on the side of opposing censorship, particularly on the internet, because it's our only shot to ever like get the truth out there. And again, this is all kind of like classical liberal, wisdom, but, be careful of a tool like this, man. I mean, even if you think just for now, it's like, well, maybe you really don't like those people very much who are getting demonetized. Okay. But once you accept that premise, once you accept that precedent, you may have an opinion that's really seen as pretty vile by some people at some point too. You may have an opinion that opposes the regime in some way. And that is when you're really not going to want censorship to be around. Think it's something to think about. All right, listen, I got to wrap the show up there. I'm going to go spend the rest of New Year's Day with the family. Thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you, everyone who's a subscriber at partoftheproblem.com for subscribing. I really appreciate all of you, and I'm looking forward to a great year with all of you. All right, take it easy. Peace.